And good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back. And I hope that you've had some time to relax, replenish, and get yourself in good order for the rest of the afternoon. This afternoon is made up of another keynote speaker, as well as some other workshops, and then a final panel discussion session. So without further ado, I'm just going to introduce Gary Barker. And Gary is a leading global voice in engaging men and boys in advancing gender equality and positive masculinities. He is a PhD and is the CEO and co-founder of Equimundo, the Center for Masculinities and Social Justice. And this was recently rebranded from Promundo US, and has worked for more than a decade in nearly 40 countries. He is also co-founder of the Instituto Promundo in Brazil, which began work on healthy masculinities and male allyship over 20 years ago. Gary is also co-founder of both Men Care and the global campaign across more than 50 countries to promote involvement as caregivers, and Men Engage, a global alliance of over 700 plus NGOs. He co-created and leads the International Men and Gender Equality Survey Images, and is the largest ever survey of men's attitudes and behaviors related to violence, fatherhood, and gender equality. And he's also co-authored 4 State of the World Fathers reports and has advised the UN on strategies to engage men and boys on gender equality. I hope that introduction does you justice, Gary. And on behalf of the Men's Development Network, I want to welcome you and thank you for taking the time. And I'm going to lead you now to offer your keynote. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean, and thanks so much for the invitation. It's an honor to get to speak with all of you. I've known the work of the network for many years, and your work has inspired us. We've seen the impact you've had on policies in Ireland, and yeah, it does inspire. So I was really honored when you invited me to talk. Yeah, I'm going to use some slides. Helps keep me organized. Show some images here. Let me pull it up. That should be working. Great. So I want to talk about where we are with boys and young men. And I want to come into this with an optimistic lens that there's the possibility for aspiration, for us to believe that young men, boys, adult men can be our best selves. And I think those best selves come in affirming a caring, aspirational version of manhood. And I also want to confess that I need this affirmation for myself as I look what's happening in my home country of the US, my other home country of Brazil. We look in the US, you no doubt see our daily feeds of mass shootings, 99% of which are men, many are young men. And I should also start by saying I got into this field of promoting healthy masculinities because I witnessed a school shooting in my high school in Texas more than 4 decades ago. In looking at that and all the reaction to what's happening with men, that is one of the worst examples. But I do still find and believe that in focusing on caring masculinities, the best that men can be in our connections to others is where we see possibilities of moving ahead. A little bit about the organization that I helped create. We recently renamed ourselves Equimundo because we wanted to focus on how do we transform intergenerational patterns of harm and promote care, empathy, and accountability among boys and men throughout their lives. And so we wanted a name that we hope said that. We do this, and at the top of that list of things we do is care. Both promoting it as a gender equality issue. We need men to do our share at home, to vote for care work, or the support that we need from the policies that support care work, to teaching boys early on that our connections to others are what make us human. Gender socialization, how do we start early? We think a lot of our work with discussions about men come really late in the life cycle and the need to start early with that. And of course, we look as well at violence prevention, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So that's what we do. I'm going to start with some research, but really using it as a way to start the conversation. I think it's important to start with, some of the sobering news that's out there. I don't think we can sugarcoat where we are with manhood in the US. We are seeing disturbing numbers of loneliness and unmet mental health needs. Around the world, we see that it's young men in particular who are the least likely to seek help when they need it, particularly for mental health services. I think the good news is that we're finally putting names on men's undiagnosed depression and creating spaces to talk about men's mental health. Our numbers in terms of suicide, they've stayed about the same, but the bad news is we've not really brought it down in most of the world. Substance abuse, we don't see that really going down much at all. We've got a new increase in boys' eating disorders as boys try to live up to an idealized body that they think they must now show into the world. COVID has made all these things possibly worse. We're stepping out of that, but it's still real. The number of young men who spend time on the angry internet between incels and men's rights organizations, we don't have good numbers on that. I think we should not kind of give that space more power than it has, but it is a real concern among parents and among those of us who care about young men. I think on the good news, we've had Me Too, and in much of the world a reckoning to say we need to call out men who have caused harm. And I think both in other spaces around sexual violence and others, we have had spaces, some men have reacted to this in negative ways, but I think on the whole, it has been important to say we must call each other out when we cause harm. And then we've got the ongoing toll of violence against boys, and I'll share some data on that, as well as the violence that men and boys carry out. Again, that we don't seem to be making much of a dent as we look at global data in terms of men's violence against women, violence against children, particularly against boys and against girls in the home. We don't seem to see big reductions there. So on balance, I think it is important to start with a bit of that sobering reality of where we are. And I love this image here of kind of a man at the crossroads saying, I don't know about other people, but when I wake up in the morning and put on my shoes, I think, now what? I think there's a lot of confusion of what it means to be men in the world today. I think that confusion can be an opportunity for us to help men aspire to be better connected, caring individuals. But it can also be, if we don't fill the space, we know what angry men's groups can do and how successful they are in getting their messages out there. So I think that's where we need to start, just with a kind of eyes wide open of what's in front of us. I know that you spoke earlier today about some results from the Man Box survey that we've done in a number of countries, and we know just how much, and I'll share a few results from that, not from the Irish study, but from other settings, of how much we do spend teaching our sons that they need to be self-sufficient and go it alone, that they have to act tough, even when they feel unsure, that they have to live up to idealized forms of what they think their physical bodies must look like, of who does what at home. Although we've made great strides on respect and support for diversity, there's still a lot of lingering heteronormativity, heterosexism, homophobia, transphobia, the hypersexuality issue. And I saw a little bit in the Irish data as well, this idea that men need sex all the time. And we saw just those high numbers in Ireland and elsewhere of how many men are getting cues about sexual activity from porn, and how much that also drives ideas of performance-based sexuality and really of the dehumanization of our bodies. We spend a lot of energy as society, and I think both the Irish study and ours in other countries have found how much boys and young men and adult men perceive the world around them repeats and reinforces these harmful ideas. A third of young men in the US believe that their female partner expects him to use violence to defend his reputation. I saw the numbers from Ireland were slightly lower, but still concerning. 2/3 of young men tell us that that they perceive from their parents telling them there was a real man version out there. There was a macho ideal of manhood they had to live up to. Half of young men that we surveyed in the US said society tells them a real man can never say no to sex. And again, high connections with that, with the ways that sexuality is portrayed in porn and among the male peer group as well. Overall, as we've looked across countries, some 40 to 50% of men kind of consistently have some cluster of attitudes that we would say are in the man box. So I can look at that as a glass half full or half empty. That is disturbing of just how much we continue to bombard our sons with these messages. But the good news is that lots of young men and adult men are breaking out of it. And I was just chatting ahead of time with Helena about, how much our news cycles are about, the clickbait of the negative things happening. But I think we also need to focus on just how much young men are resisting these harmful ideas of masculinity every single day. On the sobering news, we've got global data. This is from our International Men and Gender Equality Survey. You do not need to look at those small numbers. What these bars are showing is how many percentages of men, and you can't see the long list of countries there, but this is from every region of the world, countries from every region of the world, looking at how much men tell us they witnessed violence by a man against their mother growing up. That's the blue. And on the far side, that reaches about 60% in some countries. Not less than 20% in any country we've looked at. The red are those who experienced physical violence, either at home, in school, or in their communities. And then that purple is the percentage of men who experienced or witnessed both kinds of violence. And I show that not to compare countries of which is more violent, but just to say how much it is the lives of boys are affiliated with violence, how much we bombard our sons. And this doesn't even count what they see online. So again, the glass half empty is how much we've not made much impact in that. The glass half full is the fact that for the number of boys who see violence growing up, not all of them are repeating it. We know from the same data that men who have witnessed violence growing up and experienced it are more likely to use it later on, whether against a female partner, if they're in a heterosexual relationship, or against others. But there's a lot of boys and men who witness it and don't go on to use it. Two things that come from that. One is the importance of a trauma lens, that we understand the trauma that many boys and young men carry with them. And the good news is that we also need to build on that resistance, to talk about it, to create spaces where we allow boys and men to talk about violence they've experienced, to talk about ways they can help break those cycles of violence, and provide the services that some men and boys need. Online and in the real world, bullying is another thing that we've seen just how much in the male peer group we continue to literally beat into our sons ideas about how they should perform masculinities. A sample that we did in the US, 63% told us they had ever experienced physical violence from another man, 1 in 20 in the last month. Huge amounts of bullying, verbal and physical, because of how you dress. Do you dress to fit in? How much boys feel judged by that? 42% had experienced homophobic bullying. About 15% had defined themselves as gay. So we see how much homophobia continues to be part of both the harm of individuals who are gay, and certainly transgender and other identities, but it's also used every day against our sons to police the kind of manhood they present in public. And boys, we know growing up just how much that peer group is seen as a source. It can be a source of support, but how much it is often a source of oppressing their ideas of who they might want to be. We also asked in the same survey about empathy. If you've seen bullying around you, the vast majority had. And then we asked you, did you feel moved to do something about it? The vast majority did. Our sons live empathy. They may not show it. And then we asked them, so why didn't you do anything? 89% told us they didn't do anything because they were afraid the violence would come toward them. Now, this is a sobering piece of information as well, because it tells us just how much in our male peer groups, in schools, and the communities, we oppress the empathy that our sons feel. They are there with beating hearts, ready to be caring and support those around them, but how much they're afraid that if they step up and speak about it, they will be called out by others. I don't know whether in Ireland, but there's a new word or a relatively new word that's into the vocabulary called simp, become another way that you call boys out. If they start to help someone, other boys will say, oh, you're a simp. And essentially it's saying, you're just doing that to suck up and look good. So again, other ways that we oppress boys that would want to do the right thing, helping others. It also has an implication that you're being nice to a girl, for example, because you want to get some sexual encounter out of that being nice. Oops, excuse me there. Parents are also concerned, and here I'm also glass half full, glass half empty. The good thing is that parents, this is a survey we did in the US at the beginning of COVID. Many parents very concerned about how their sons are able to express themselves. 72% of parents said they didn't think their sons could show when they're insecure, about the same number when their sons are lonely. 2/3 said they didn't think their sons could comfortably say when they feel scared or sad. And very troubling, half of parents said their sons didn't feel comfortable showing when they love. I happen to think that's probably the most important human verb and action that we can express is the love of others. And disturbing just that half of parents thought their sons could not show their love, whether to themselves as parents or others around them. We've been looking a lot on media and how much our sons are playing more video games, and particularly the streaming where you're following others. We did a survey on that during COVID and found how much about 80% of those encounters of streaming online included some messages of harmful masculinities, sexism, misogyny, racism, homophobia. How little the streamers, those who moderate the games or who you watch playing, spoke out when they saw this harm. When they did, when the streamers themselves had negative comments, sexist comments, etc., it rippled through the chat room. That is, boys in the chat room repeated it. When the streamers called it out, which unfortunately was not common enough, it also had an effect of reducing the amount of harmful language that was used online. Interestingly as well, the number of boys who told us they could be their authentic selves online. Now, this is troubling because authentic selves means games in which about 90% of male characters carry out violence, not for protection or defense or self-defense, but to cause harm for personal gain. So again, it is troubling to say, what is the world we've made for our sons that they feel like their more authentic selves are in playing games that show male characters harming others. We also did another study of what boys were watching on television. This we carried out with the Gina Davis Institute based in Hollywood, and looked at the television shows that boys ages 7 to 13 were watching. There's a good news, bad news in this study as well. One is boys are seeing girls and women as competent, as likely to speak online, as likely to be in the world doing the things they want to do as they were to see male characters. When we combined, however, or looked at what male characters were doing compared to female characters, we saw that male characters were far more likely to be shown incompetent at doing care work, more likely to use violence against others, less likely to be involved in resolving conflicts peacefully, less likely to be shown providing emotional support to others. So just how much the television that our sons watch continues to repeat ideas that men, we're incompetent about care work, violence is a normal thing, that we're not very emotionally expressive in positive ways. Now that, of course, exists a lot in the real world, but again, just how much our sons are spending time streaming, watching, paying attention to messages about manhood that continue to reinforce these harmful ideas. There's we're looking a lot these days at the trauma science, at how much, if we looked at those numbers that I shared before of how much boys, girls as well, but boys seem to witness violence and experience it in higher numbers. How much this also affects us, not only our ideas about ourselves and how we interact with others, but also affects our brains in terms of how we've got a huge amount of neuroscience now on how our developing brains as children and young people respond to violence around us. And I think it is important to acknowledge that we also know that when we pull young people out of a traumatic situation or out of the harm and build and rebuild relationships, the brain functioning does seem to return to normal. So we're frightened about this the longer that trauma goes on, the longer that multiple forms of trauma go on, the longer there is a possibility of longer-term harm, that is, of affecting the brain's long-term abilities to regulate mood, motivation, and fear, and also even to suppress physical growth and the immune system. But if we provide the care the listening, the safe spaces for boys and girls who have witnessed harm, we do see that it's effective. We're trying to bring that understanding into our programming as well, that it's not only about talking about new ideas about masculinities, but we do have to open up spaces to the 40% of young people around us who have either experienced violence at home or witnessed some kinds of violence at home. So what do we see works? In our approaches over the years, we've seen the importance of just intentional conversations about healthy manhood. It's not just enough to, the last couple of years, the word toxic masculinities have entered. There's a lot of awareness about this thing we call manhood or masculinity, but I don't think it's enough just to say, oh, that's toxic masculinity, and we end the conversation. We need to create spaces online, after school, caregivers, in the sports spaces and arenas where young men and lots of young men hang out, to have really intentional conversations about what healthy masculinity looks like. Let's not assume that our sons know about it. Help them to understand what it is. We need to model it. We see, again, the importance of engaging parents and all caregivers in this, but particularly, this does not say that all households need a biological father present. There's a huge amount of roles for women in this as well, but it is important, it seems, that our sons see examples of caring masculinity around them. And again, I emphasize this can be fathers, but many times it's uncles and brothers, coaches, teachers, and the like, modeling to boys every day what male caregiving looks like. I talked about trauma before. I think we don't want to over-prescribe trauma as happening in individuals. The variety of how we react and are resilient in the face of trauma is tremendously varied. But we do want to be aware, to be attuned in our programming, that trauma is a huge issue in many boys and men's lives. Supporting boys to do the right thing, not to think that we have to teach them to do it, but really to support that empathy that I talked about before that is there. And I think, again, that's moving to this idea of a belief in the positive and the optimistic side, that boys will be their best caring and respectful selves. And I think to keep a focus on the issue that boys are relational learners, that we learn not, we spend a lot of time on our devices. Many of our sons are spending a lot of time with the doors closed or in the basement or wherever in front of a screen, but to really help gently coax them off of that into the spaces of engaging, because it is really in those relationships where they see the learning. We've spent a lot of years evaluating our group education models online and in person. And while we're pleased to show the impact of that, that's our Manhood 2.0 curriculum. An interesting factor that keeps coming out in the evaluation is perhaps the most important aspect of our engagement with boys and young men is, in fact, the relationship with facilitators. In fact, sometimes where we've compared just good engagement with facilitators, whether it's around job readiness or sports, compared to our discussions and the discussion group around healthy masculinity, sometimes it shows up that simply being in positive relationships with male role models is in itself a driver of change. So again, it just reinforces, yes, we need to do curriculum-based models, but the importance of engaging men and women as facilitating and promoting healthy masculinities with our sons. Just to end on a message here, the beginning of COVID, we did interviews with boys in 2 different parts of the US. You have probably followed the polarization of US politics in the last years. And we were curious about how Republican or more conservative households looked at this compared to more progressive households. Parents had different worries. Parents in the more conservative households were worried their sons were going to be called out for harm they didn't do. That whole idea that women somehow over-report violence they've experienced. Progressive households were more worried that their sons would grow up to be pro-feminist, to support women's rights, to be healthy in their versions about masculinity. So there were clearly differences about parents. But when we talked to boys, and we just asked open-ended questions, what does it mean to be a man? Or if we said, what did it mean to be a good man? And actually, it didn't really matter which way we asked that question, whether good man or just man. And if we didn't load it with any political words, the boys in the conservative or the more progressive settings had the same things to say. The words were, these were boys ages 8 to 11. The words were kind and helpful, trustworthy, nice, responsible, humble, respectful, courageous, sports fanatic, good decision, stands up for what they believe in. You could get goosebumps just listening to the words, how much our sons aspiring to be in the world in ways that we would hope that they would be. And then we looked at their brothers, slightly older. We looked at the 11 to 14-year-olds. And that's when they started to say, I would like to be these things, but if I am those things, it will be held against me. I will be treated as a punk. I will be bullied. I will be called gay. Just how much the male peer group starting in the early adolescent years becomes this space that we allow and create. I think it's important that we don't take in some view that somehow adolescence is a life stage that is meant to be so full of harm. We're the adults who should be scaffolding those relationships. We're the ones responsible for how those peer groups create and reinforce harmful ideas about masculinities. I end with that mix of I'm hopeful, but I'm also somewhat pessimistic because we've got to do so much to break out, to still support these healthy ideas about masculinities. Just one final reflection. We launched about 2 months ago the biggest ever compilation of our data from the International Men and Gender Equality Survey. That is data from nearly 50 countries over the last 10 years. And what we did was look at the younger generation compared to the older generation and that in the middle to see if we're making progress and to see if we could paint a story of which direction we are in terms of men believing in a more equitable, non-violent version of masculinity. The sobering news is we did not perceive that we're making progress. Overall, as we compared the younger generation to their fathers and grandfathers, the younger generation was not buying in to more equitable versions of manhood. Now, our women's rights colleagues have been telling us this for years, that we're not making the progress that we need to make, or that it has stalled, or that it is uneven. And I think our data affirm that. So on the one hand, I am pessimistic. I'm not pessimistic about the change because we also saw that younger women, the younger generation of women, is demanding change. And I do believe that their voices are being heard. And I think the important part of that is that this journey toward healthy masculinities is not, we've checked off the box, we've implemented a curriculum, we've done one initiative, and we're done. It is the 25 years of the Men's Development Network. It is doing this work and being aware that this is going to be a lifetime of work. My second home country of Brazil has a rich and very oppressed indigenous population, the vast majority of which was wiped out in the encounters with the European colonization. But there's a rich telling of the cultural values from the indigenous culture. And there's one piece that I particularly like from the Yanomami. From their cosmology, they believe that the sky can be oppressive, and they must at many times do dance and rituals in the evening to basically beat the sky away so that they can wake up the next day, so that the sun will come out and the darkness in the sky won't oppress them. And then they're asked, well, how often do they do that? And they will tell Western anthropologists every single day. So I think this is important. This is where I want to end. Our cause for gender equality, for gender justice, for healthy masculinities. I've occasionally wished there's moments we could rest, that sometimes we're done, that as I think of a group like the MDN doing this for 25 years, that you could say, yes, we're done. And I think what we have to feel the strength that we have to do this every single day. Thank you very much.
Gary, thank you for your piece there today. I think there's an element of it that's truly uplifting for me to hear you speak in the way you do. The sense of hope that is there, notwithstanding the good news, the bad news that may be there, but I think the true sense of hope, and I suppose the belief in our young men and in the boys that are in our lives, and what we want for them. I talked this morning about saying, surely this is what we want for our young men in our lives, to live their most authentic selves and to do it without care, without a worry of how it may be perceived. So I really, really appreciate it. We're coming towards the end, and there was a couple of questions there, but I think we might try and get them in throughout the day and with panel discussions. But I think I'm going to thank you again for your contribution. Really, really appreciate it. And then I'm going to encourage people to step back into the lobby now and then go pick the workshop that they hope to attend for the next 40 odd minutes or so. So thank you, Gary, and really appreciate it. And if you can stick around as well, that would be fantastic too.
Great. So thank you for the invitation, and really thank you for the inspiring work.
Okay.
Your 25 years just does affirm that we have to be in this for the long haul.
Yeah, and the road gets longer, which is always
Yeah.
a good thing. It's not, I don't see it as a bad thing. We're here for the long haul. Absolutely.
That's it.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I'll see you all later on. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.